start the 32nd meeting of the Board of Internal Economy. We'll go in two stages. The first is public. We have two items in camera, and then we'll go to public for the other part. So if we could start immediately with item 1, minutes of previous meeting. Does anybody have any changes to make, amendments, or could we adopt it? Okay, adopt it. Very good. Number 2, business arising from previous meetings. Are there any issues to raise?
People would like to raise from the second, from the minutes of the last meeting. Ms. Finley.
No, sorry, no.
Very good. Do we have an approval? I see a noddings of head. Thank you very much. Item number 3, if I can invite Mr. St. George up to the table to give us the 2023-2024 annual financial report and request for approval of budget carry forward to the following fiscal year. Mr. St. George, the floor is yours.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Today, I'm tabling the annual financial report of the House of Commons for the fiscal year ending March 31st, 2024. This includes audited financial statements from KPMG. I'm asking the board to authorize reserve of the operating budget. With regards to the financial results, the adjusted budget is now $782.2 million. That amount includes approved authorizations of $641.2 million, as well as adjustments for legislative authorizations and free services. As at March 31st, 2024, the total expenditures were $751.8 million, which means we have an excess of $30.4 million.
0.2% of the main estimates, and is mainly the result of strong stewardship by members and House officers of their office budgets, lower than anticipated travel expenses, and delays in certain operational projects. Annually, with the board's approval, the House carries forward lapsed amounts of up to 5% of the main estimates. And for 23-24, this equates to $21.2 million. From this amount, $7.9 million will be allocated back to the office budgets of members and House officers, and the remaining $13.3 million will be allocated to the administration, mainly to fund member-related projects, such as the implementation of the expense management system, as a solution to support the accessibility plan approved by the BOIE, the life cycling of IT equipment and infrastructure, along with enhancement to the members' orientation programs. The administration is therefore seeking the board's approval to include a budget carry forward of $21.2 million in the 24-25 supplementary estimates. I will now ask Mr. Newman, KPMG audit partner, to present their audit summary.
Thank you. Is that on? Yeah. Thank you for this opportunity to present our audit opinion on the 2024 financial statements and provide a brief summary of the conduct of our audit. I would like to introduce my colleague, Jonathan Genero, Audit Senior Manager for the audit. The Chief Financial Officer has presented the 2024 financial statements, which management has prepared using public sector accounting standards. Public sector accounting standards are used by all governments in Canada and are issued by the Public Sector Accounting Board, upon which I served as a member and vice chair for 12 years ending in 2020. Our role as your independent auditors is to obtain reasonable assurance about whether these financial statements as a whole are free from material misstatement. The 2024 financial statement audit began with the development of our audit plan, which was based on multiple discussions with management. Our year-end audit was executed in accordance with that plan. During our audit, we received full participation from your House administration. All of our questions were answered, all of the required supporting documentation received, and all issues were satisfactorily resolved. We have completed our audit and issued our audit opinion on June 5th, 2024 in our independent auditor's report. That opinion states that the financial statements present fairly, in all material respects, the financial position of the House of Commons as at March 31st, 2024, and its results of operation, its accumulated surplus, and its cash flows for the year then ended in accordance with Canadian public sector accounting standards. This is the second year that these audited financial statements were published in early June. I want to commend the House administration for implementing the ongoing financial reporting processes and controls required to achieve this date. I also thank this board for scheduling this presentation prior to your summer recess during what is a very busy legislative agenda. And that concludes my report.
Thank you very much, Mr. Newman. One moment, please. Are there any questions from members of the board? Y a-t-il des questions?
Are there any questions? Monsieur Scheer.
Thanks very much. I just looking at the breakdown of the carry forward. So I just want to, the lapsed funding from MOBs was about 26 million, but only about half of that will be available to members in the coming fiscal year.
I guess to answer that question, probably most of it will be going to the members. Per the mass, there is actually a calculation that determines based on the gap or the surpluses within each member budgets at year end. The sum of that is equal to the $7.9 million that I referenced. So then the gap between that and the difference goes back to administration, which, as I mentioned, goes back to the members in terms of system-level projects that benefits all parties and all members.
Right.
That is correct. Yeah.
Okay, so about 8 of the 26, about roughly 8 million will be available to the members directly themselves. The rest goes through
Correct.
House administration.
Yes.
And did you list the projects that that lapse? Are those the ones that are here? The transformation of parliamentary proceedings, life cycling of IT infrastructure.
That's exactly it. So we got the transformation of parliamentary proceedings. We got the expense management solutions. That's about $2.3 million. The accessibility plan. That's about $1.6 million. The life cycling of IT equipment, about $1.3 million. We got the MOP, as I mentioned in the speech, as well as corporate health and safety case management solutions. That's about $600,000.
Okay, and then I think you had also said that a component of the increase in operational costs was changes to the actuarial adjustment for the MP pension plan. How of the 110 million, how much of that is related to the MP pension plan, and how much of it would be other increases to salaries on House administration?
Just a second here. Do we have it?
I don't think I have that breakdown in my.
Yeah. The salaries, so the actual adjustments was $32.8 million, which was a expense charge to the member portion of the House administration or the House budget. The remaining, there was another $32 million, which was related to economic increases within the administrative component. Then we had various other increases, which are included in the report as well. So those are your two main adjustments. And the actual adjustment is a legislative requirement by the House in order to do the evaluation, which is done at year end every 3 years, and it becomes an adjustment within our books. The liability side affects the Treasury Board's balance sheet as opposed to our balance sheet. Mm-hmm.
Merci, Monsieur Scheer.
Thank you, Mr. Scheer. Are there any other questions?
Approval of the audited annual financial report. Thank you very much. Before we go into camera, first of all, I'd like to just make sure that we have a consent around the table, as I said, to approve the proposed budget carry forward for fiscal 2024-2025. Merci.
Thank you. I see no objections.
camera, I understand it is normal and good governance practice for independent auditors to have a discussion in camera with board members regarding the preparation of year-end audited financial statements. I therefore would like to propose to board members that we hold a short in-camera session without the House administration officials to allow board members to have this discussion. Nous ferons une courte pause.
We'll have a brief pause to go in camera, and I would ask House of Commons administration staff to leave the room, both virtually and in person. Once that discussion has finished, the people who are here physically can come back in the room, and those participating virtually will receive an email asking them to come back to the meeting. Everyone agrees? All right.
We will now move into in-camera.
We will resume the meeting and we'll move on to item number 5.
Number 5, to give us an update on the interpretation resources. I imagine this is due to current events. This is going to be an issue which will take some time. I will be monitoring the clock to make sure that we can have a full discussion, yet making sure that we can complete the agenda before the summer pause. Alors, je sais que ça va être un enjeu.
So I know that this will be a topic that will be of great interest to everyone around the table. So I'm going to manage us to ensure that we can have a good discussion, but we will have to wrap up before the summer break. So I want to make sure that we complete all items on the agenda today. Mr. Jean-François Limburner, welcome in your new capacity as Chief Executive Officer of the Translation Bureau. We had the opportunity to work with you in your former role with Public Services Canada, and I give you the floor. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I would like to acknowledge the presence of my colleagues, Matthew Ball, Vice President, Services to Parliament and Interpretation, as well as Annie Trépanier, Vice President, Policy and Corporate Services. We're pleased to appear today with our partners from the House of Commons Administration. I'd like to acknowledge that we are gathered on the traditional territory of the Algonquin people. And I also take this opportunity to wish you all a happy Public Service Week. Mr. Chair, honorable members of the Board of Internal Economy, thank you for inviting me to discuss with you the quality linguistic services provided by the Translation Bureau to the House of Commons. I joined the Translation Bureau in January, as you said, and every day I'm impressed by the hundreds of language professionals who work hard to help you carry out your deliberations in English, French, indigenous languages, sign languages, and foreign languages. We've been doing this essential work since 1934, that is, for 90 years now, and we're even celebrating a double anniversary.
Ralentir votre débit, j'imagine.
I'm just going to ask you to slow down, Mr. Limburner. The interpreters are excellent, but it's pretty fast. So I'll resume. This essential work we've been doing since 1934, and that is for 90 years, and we're celebrating a double anniversary this year, as 2024 marks 65 years of simultaneous interpretation in the Parliament of Canada. I take this opportunity to thank Claudette, Hélène, and Cecilia, who are in the booth today.
Topic recently. The Translation Bureau has discussed it with the Board of Internal Economy on several occasions, most recently in November 2023. And the situation continues to develop. You'll recall that in February 2023, following a complaint from the Interpreters Union, the Canada Labour Program directed the Translation Bureau to interpret virtual participants only when they use an ISO microphone and to test the audio system in committee rooms. In cooperation with our House administration partner, we responded quickly to these directions, which were closed in August 2023. On April this year, following an acoustic incident during a House Standing Committee session, the Canada Labour Program gave us a new direction to protect interpreters from repeated exposure to feedback, also known as Larsen effect. Once again, with the help of our colleagues in the House of Commons Administration, we were able to respond quickly to this direction. In a matter of days, numbers of new measures that you know very well were put in place, which the Labour Program deems satisfactory. I would take this opportunity to thank you, Mr. Chair, for the communication you sent to your colleagues on April 29 to make them aware of the new protection measures to be followed. I would also like to thank you for the way you handled the incident that occurred Monday afternoon during the question period. Thank you for taking the time to repeat the safety guidelines for handling earpieces. Compliance with these guidelines is extremely important to prevent incidents. The incidents that still occur are mainly due to human behavior at this point. Cela étant dit, Monsieur le Président, l'incident de lundi est le seul cas.
That being said, Mr. Chair, Monday's incident is the only case of Larsen effect to be reported since the measure to prevent Larsen effect was put in place. Although each incident is one too many, the figures show that our efforts over the past few years are paying off. While 128 reports of acoustic incidents were received in 2022, there were 74 reports in 2023 and 22 so far in 2024. So that's a significant decrease in acoustic incidents. I would like to thank the House of Commons administration for which is responsible for technical support for interpretation for this success, and without which we wouldn't have been able to achieve such convincing results. I'd also like to thank each and every one of the honourable members of Parliament who agreed to change their work methods to protect interpreters, including with regard to earpieces. Mr. Chairman, honourable members of the Board of Internal Economy, it is probably impossible to completely eliminate the risk of acoustic incidents. Sound is a highly complex thing that is difficult to control perfectly. Nevertheless, we're determined to continue working as a team with the administration, the Canada Labour Program, and experts in the field to find new protective measures that might be implemented and minimize this risk. Among other efforts, we will receive this year the results of 3 new studies, 2 on the sound transmitted to interpreters and 1 on changes in their hearing. These sustained efforts will help us not only to improve the well-being of our interpreters, but also to avoid service interruptions and maintain a healthy workforce to serve Parliament well. Protecting our interpreters also means protecting our interpretation capacity. Indeed, in terms of capacity.
Monsieur le Président, honorables députés, je sais que notre capacité de servir le Parlement est un sujet qui vous tient à cœur et nous poursuivrons nos efforts pour la renforcer.
5 years. These funding echoes the temporary 2-year funding of $18 million that we received in 2021. This money will be used to further strengthening the interpretation capacity, amongst other things. Indeed, while we're able to meet the House routine needs, including returning to the pre-pandemic schedule, as planned for the fall, we're still having difficulties responding to last-minute requests. Compared to November 2023, our pool of interpreters have remained stable, with around 100 freelancers and some 70 staff members, interpreters. That's why we're continuing with our various capacity initiatives. In our effort to tackle the labor shortage and foster the next generation of interpreter, I've met with Canadian University myself, and some of them have shown interest in creating new interpretation program in 2025. We're also setting up scholarship for future interpreters, because in the budget 2024, the government has authorized us to allocate $1 million over 5 years for scholarship. Lastly, we're continuing to implement our remote interpretation services that you may be familiar with, also known as dispersed interpretation, which enable us to use freelancers outside of Ottawa to meet Parliament needs. We are working to establish new contracts to maintain this service in the fall. En ce qui concerne notre capacité de traduction,
in terms of our translation capacity, we translated 58 million words for the House of Commons compared with 38 million the previous year. This increase is more than 40%. So to be able to absorb these high volumes of urgent translations, we are continuing to invest in translation support technologies. You've certainly seen a lot of interest in artificial intelligence and its use by the Translation Bureau, but I want to reassure you that the Translation Bureau has been using machine translation since 1977, and today we use new artificial intelligence tools to speed up translation when documents lend them to it and the latest advances are used. So we, of course, all this happens under the watchful eye of our language professionals who ensure the quality of the output. Indeed, being able to read, understand, and compare text while ensuring the meaning and quality in English and French are key skills of the Translation Bureau's language professionals. They are trained and qualified for this work, which is so important to the Parliament of Canada. Mr. Chair, honourable members of the Board of Internal Economy, I hope I've given you a thorough overview of the Translation Bureau's efforts to continue offering you excellent linguistic services. We are now available to answer your questions. Thank you.
Déjà, certains membres.
There are already some members who have said they would like to ask questions, but before I move along, I have a question to ask you, if I may. Colleagues, Mr. Limburger, we're very concerned by the safety of our interpreters, that's clear, and I'm delighted to see that up until now, interpreters haven't been hurt by what happened on Monday. I'm also delighted to learn that the number of incidents is going down significantly. So certainly we would like to have no incidents at all, but we are doing our best, and I think that reflects not only ensuring that equipment is state of the art to protect the interpreters, but also that our habits as the users, the members of Parliament, that we change our habits to ensure that this will be the case. In any case, the question of capacity you referred to, I know well that before the pandemic, the interpreters worked 6-hour shifts for in-person meetings. But because of the transition to Zoom and all of the problems that we've had, it was reduced to 4 hours. Do you have any idea when we could get back to 6 hours? But it seems that we have a problem with the training of new interpreters. It's almost equal to the number of interpreters who are retiring. So there isn't an increase in capacity in terms of the number of interpreters, but the needs are urgent for members and the various caucuses for special events that can come up, whether they're public or in private. So do you have any idea of when you might go back to 6 hours? Because that would give us a significant increase in capacity to accommodate the needs that we have here.
Ce que je peux mentionner, bien, effectivement,
Excellent question, Mr. Chairman. The reduction in the sound problems are not all feedback or Larson effects. The last incidents I mentioned are due to human error. There's no bad intention behind that, but that's the hardest to eradicate. The instructions of the Labor Bureau mentioned that Larson effects were a danger if they keep repeating themselves. So our intention is to go back to pre-pandemic measures with evidence. So it's not just an issue of capacity, there's also cost. We have limited budgets. That 4 to 6 hours, we have to demonstrate. That's why I mentioned studies that we have about sounds with the University of Ottawa. We're conducting these tests. There's also the health of interpreters. We have to be able to demonstrate the good results with evidence, and that will allow us to go back to 6 hours. That's our objective, and we're working with other jurisdictions worldwide to make sure that Canada is in a good position to do so. Now, of course, incidents like we had Monday or others before that mean the situation is evolving. The labor people are looking at this too. I know we'll work on this during the summer with our colleagues here. We haven't abandoned the other measures that were imposed on it that happened in the space of a weekend to ensure service on a Monday. So we're looking at each of those measures to see whether there should be some adjustment to avoid interference during your meetings beyond the 4 to 6 hour issue. Technology may help us too to reduce such incidents. That's our objective. Thank you. Mr. Julian.
Said very often that interpreters are the very foundation of our bilingual parliament, and I wanted to take a moment just to pay tribute to one of those interpreters, Cindy Runser, who is retiring next week on Friday after 31 years of service with the Translation Bureau as a parliamentary interpreter. And all of us who listen to the English channel, including my parents, who have now passed, but who often preferred the voices of Cindy and the interpreters to the original when I was speaking in French in the House, they have heard how effective the interpreters are, how Cindy was effective. And she was so confident as she wound herself through the ups and downs of Parliament and the House of Commons procedures, even despite the loud background noise that we often see in question period. And with her knowledge of parliamentary procedure, she could literally be a House Leader or a whip. She really has a knowledge that's second to none. She also did exceptional work with the National Defence Committee as an interpreter for that committee, and even hosted end-of-year barbecues for committee members at her home. She's a cancer survivor, as we all know, with 2 grown-up daughters. Cindy's really a force of nature. She'll be sorely missed by her colleagues, indeed all of Parliament, and I know that all members of BOIE and all parliamentarians would join me in wishing her the very best of her retirement and to thank her for her contributions to the country. Maintenant, j'ai des questions.
Now, I have questions that I wanted to put. We have an open letter that was sent and that we received talking about a new group of interpreters. And what's concerning to me about that is there's new recruits, but apparently they're not being supervised the way they should be. What I understand from this open letter is that these new recruits will not get the kind of supervision they need from the Bureau to pass their exam as accredited interpreters. There wouldn't be no follow-up with their accredited colleagues and who have all the experience. It's also mentioned here that robust monitoring of new recruits is lacking, and it's difficult to say what missions these new recruits will be assigned to. Now, given the importance of the quality of interpretation, I'd like to hear your answer to these very important questions. There's new recruits. We want them to be well supervised, that they can pass their exams to do this very difficult work. That is, to interpret this parliament. I don't understand that all resources are not put in place to help these new recruits. So what is your answer to these questions that are perfectly legitimate? Excellent question, Mr. Speaker. I think that when Dominique Laporte, my predecessor, appeared previously, there was a discussion on capacity and the difficulty of the accreditation exam that allows one to interpret in Parliament. It's an extremely difficult exam. The success rate is very low and has been for many years. These new people who are in these university programs are on the decline too, not just interpretation, but all language professions. The Bureau is responding and trying to identify those who have potential and want to continue their studies in languages. There are many factors. We all hear that AI, for instance, will replace them eventually, so maybe that discourages these people. We have to identify that factor. The program discussed in November and that we're putting in place is to identify those who have the capacity but who missed passing their exam but were pretty close to the pass note, so that we can assign them in the Bureau and be supervised. I'll allow Mr. Ball to talk to this. He is an interpreter himself. They have a lot of experience outside of Parliament, and that might allow them to work with the best interpreters in the world. I think we have the best in the world in Canada, not shy to say so, and prepare them for the next exam. We have 2 a year. In the past, there was only 1 exam a year. The pool of participants is quite limited. There are 2 universities in Canada that offer an interpretation program. In my opening remarks, I said we were working with 2 other universities to increase that pool, but we have to get our hands on the people who have potential and who are interested. People who will work in translation, it's the same thing. These are children who read a lot at 10 years old. There are fewer and fewer of those, so we have to identify them very early to say, come and have a career in the Translation Bureau in the Government of Canada, there are jobs for you. But the levels are declining. So it's a strategy to try to identify them and accompany these people in this category. I'll give the floor to Mr. Ball to define the level of learning required. With your permission, Mr. Chairman, I'm very pleased to talk to you about the pilot project we're considering. I want to assure you that there will be limits in place for this pilot project. This is a pilot project. It is not a full-fledged program yet. We had a lot of consultation with our team, the staff interpreters, the senior interpreters, and LAIC, which represents freelancers. None of these people would work on Parliament Hill. As Mr. Limburner just explained, we also serve the Government of Canada, the departments. The Official Languages Act says that we have to serve Parliament as a priority, and we've left aside certain government clients who have to hire their own interpreters without supervision from the Bureau, without Bureau contracts, without the quality control of the Bureau. So we think that with this pilot project, we'd be able to serve these clients outside of Parliament better. They will not be on Parliament Hill.
Members of the board that we have a lot of experience in training new interpreters. Our senior interpreters teach at the university. I did myself for many years. We have many years of experience with supervising and monitoring new interpreters, and that will be the case with this new project as well. Comme je disais, pour moi, c'est...
And as I was saying, this is a good way to meet the needs of our Government of Canada clients. So I assure you that there will be limits. Our expertise will be put in place to ensure that this pilot project goes well and ensures quality for our clients. And I think that our government clients will get better service because of this pilot project. And I repeat that this is only a pilot project. So we'll see and we'll evaluate it and as our experience unfolds. Thank you, Mr. Ball. One last question. I know others want to put questions too, but what are the two universities that you're working with right now? Mr. Chairman, right now the two universities offering the program are the University of Ottawa and Glendon College at York. And then there will be the University of Quebec, and we have discussions with the University in Trois-Rivières and Laval University. Thank you. Madame de Bellefeuille, followed by Ms. Finley and Ms. Sirota. Madame de Bellefeuille. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Before I put my questions, Mr. Limburner, in the agenda, it said there was a follow-up on the dashboard. We have to keep some time because I want to talk about that, but I don't want to cut short the conversation with the Translation Bureau. Mr. Limburner, well, welcome here. We're very happy to see you. You've been there for 6 months, so you seem to have taken a walk throughout your garden, identified the issues, and put in place an action plan because, as you know, not only are we concerned with quantity, but also quality. At the outset, I can say that I wear my headpiece all day. I'm Francophone. In order to participate in work in Parliament, I have to wear my earpiece. And I can tell you that 95% of the time, all the work goes on in English. So as a Francophone whose English is not sufficient to follow the work here, I have to rely on the interpreters only. And I can tell you that for many weeks now, I've had a few complaints from members, and I was a witness to that too. Perhaps the quality is not satisfactory in order to participate actively in the work of Parliament. Maybe we could have a little meeting so that you could identify the interpreters that may be a little weaker, and perhaps you could give them additional support at that point. But I wanted to ask you this. You know, at the Board of Internal Economy, I've been here 5 years. We're used to the House administration and the procedures team. We have a common goal, that is to serve members of Parliament, parliamentarians, so that we can do our jobs as well as possible, so that we can perform. We're always seeking solutions in order to do our jobs properly. And of course, your arrival is very welcome, but I'm curious to know, are you on the same page? How would you qualify your relationship with the administration, and how do you see your service vis-a-vis us as parliamentarians to do our jobs? Very good question, Mr. Chairman. I am a professional in quality control, so I understand your point about quality and efficiency too. Service, continuity of service, we're an essential service. My other colleagues at Public Service and Procurement Canada also deliver services, so we want to ensure continual service at all times for all of your work. I talked about volume earlier. This is the 20th largest language organization in the world. 376 million words translated this year. That's a record for us. But of course, the expectations are that documents are translated as fast as possible. You talked about my 90-day plan. I think there's improvement to be made there in the way we do our transactions with documents. We talked about the format of documents. Many motions are tabled. We get documents in all kinds of formats. So we're improving not only in translation per se, but the whole management of projects that are more and more voluminous. Yes, AI is coming to help us. It helps you too. It can send emails in your place. So volume's going up everywhere. To remedy that, we have to adjust. Now, when it comes to the relationship with the House of Commons, our services deal with other groups to help us when it comes to the audiovisual side. That's not unique, but I'm very impressed with Mr. McDonald's team, Mr. Dicare's team. We work hand in hand. I said earlier, this is a team sport. I really feel there's great cooperation from one and all in order to offer this service. I understand that some of your interest would be speed. You want a committee to come back online. Sometimes we get the information too, so we want to ensure the safety of our employees, but we meet regularly, quite often, in fact, to ensure continuity. We have great communications. If there are needs, the Translation Bureau accompanies you and your colleagues during meetings to get your feedback on certain quality issues. I can understand. I understand when it comes to translation, and there's volume. People sometimes have a tone of voice. I spoke too fast earlier. There are many factors that affect quality when it comes to interpretation, but when it comes to translation too. If you have any feedback, we'll be pleased to consider it and take it into account. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm pleased to hear that because, to my mind, if we want to find a solution where we guarantee quantity and quality of interpretation, and especially given that, we have to work hand in hand with the administration. You'll have to have the same values at the outset. You are the tools of parliamentarians to help them do their jobs. So I know sometimes you're sort of split because you are representing employees who have a collective bargaining, but the solution has one aim, is to allow parliamentarians to do their job. So you're at the service of parliamentarians in a way. I'm pleased to see that your relationship is good and that you're going to make sure that you can serve parliamentarians well and be on the same page. Now, my great concern is that as Mr. Julian and others have gotten this open letter in their MP's inbox, we had access to your presentation of the pilot project, which is a proposal that says, well, if you did your training and you didn't pass the exam, well, perhaps you're a good candidate. We'll take you anyway. And we'll have you get more experience so that one day you will pass the accreditation exam to be up to speed. I find that a little worrisome because I say to myself, we knew that within 3 or 4 years, the ratio of interpreters retiring will go up. It's quite frightening. I'm sure you know that. So my temptation, if I was a manager, would be to say, I'm going to widen my pool of interpreters who didn't pass the exam. I'll put them in that situation, hoping that they can pass it in the future to gain back what I lose. Because in the past 5 years, that's what happened. A lot of efforts were deployed by your predecessors, but there are more people leaving than coming in, and you explain the reasons for that. As a Francophone working solely through interpretation, I know we need quantity, but I'm not prepared to sacrifice quality. Because if you reduce quality, I am directly impacted by the negative consequences of that drop in quality. I wouldn't say that it's an attack on my parliamentary privileges. I wouldn't go that far. But if what I hear in my ear is not of good quality, I can't participate in the work. And I was alerted. I have a table here of your red, yellow, and green. You're prepared to have at conferences interpretation that has more than a few omissions, inaccuracies, who have an impact on meaning, where errors in language are frequent enough or serious enough to distract the listener. Interpretation does not completely satisfy all criteria or technical criteria. So I looked at this, and you're saying we're going to reduce the quality to that. We're going to bring in a bunch of interpreters who are classified yellow to look to do conferences. Conference calls? I'd like you to explain what is conference calls exactly. What are we talking about? I can answer that question, Mr. Chairman, but first of all, the number of interpreters, that crisis is worldwide. It's not just in Canada. There's a shortage of interpreters that is felt everywhere in the world. There are new technological opportunities that allow interpreters to work remotely.
Currently, our interpreters are brought here. They work with you within the parliamentary precinct. And there's competition. Other groups are looking for interpreters as well. So we have to be competitive in that regard as well. So in terms of quality, I'll make a parallel with the documents we translate. We're translating bills, court decisions, memoirs to cabinet, and others. So clearly our language professionals are the best. But we have clients sometimes who have needs. It's Public Service Week. There are barbecue menus, things like that that we receive that the client themselves will be tolerant of. I know that people more and more have access to tools that are easy to use, user-friendly. So, but in terms of interpretation, it's kind of the same thing. We have events that we will not compromise quality on, like those here in Parliament, but we have other meetings where there are employee meetings where they are perhaps willing to have a lower level of quality so that they can at least have an interpretation service, because the alternative is none. So once again, I come back to the beginning. What we want to do is that you said the attrition is a curve that we have to take into consideration with the age of interpreters. So we have to more and more target candidates who have potential and who are interested. So we're confident that if they are surrounded by the best, that their capacity or abilities will be improved. So I'll turn to Mr. Ball as well. Thank you, if I may. I think that the question of the demographic curve has been raised, and Mr. Limburner just indicated the importance of bringing new blood into our ranks. I would like to reassure the members of the Board of Internal Economy that we have a great deal of experience in this regard. I was an intern in 1999, and I went through this same process. We hire people often at that intern level who haven't achieved the quality level that we require to serve Parliament, and it will be the same case here. However, those people will be sent to government conferences and not to Parliament. These what will happen with the new candidates. They will not be assigned to Parliament. They will be assigned to meetings that are more general in nature at conferences. As I said, we have a great deal of experience in this regard, and it's the same process we use for our interns. And they would not be employees of the Bureau, they'd be freelancers. But we feel that with our experience and our mentoring, we could improve the quality of their work and give the experience that these young interpreters need, so that indeed one day, we hope, they will achieve the level required to serve Parliament, and that will be shown through our accreditation exams. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In fact, that's a question I'm asking myself, because I have overseen interns in my life, and you have to take time to do that. You have to assign that time. They have to be able to benefit from that kind of mentorship, mentoring. And what we're told is that currently there is such a shortage. There's no time to give to that kind of support, and not for new people that you might be integrating who failed the accreditation exam. So I'm wondering, Mr. Limburner, how are you going to manage to achieve your goals if you don't have that support? Because in the end, you don't have the staff to do so. You can't take interpreters, who's a senior interpreter, to shepherd an intern for someone who failed their entrance exam in interpretation to make them move along, because you have a staff shortage. So are you just going to leave these people working without any support? And that's the same thing for your pilot project, where now you're preparing to bring people into the pool who've not passed the accreditation exam. Mr. Chairman, it's a good question again, but I just want to reassure everyone here that our interpreters, despite the capacity issues we've had additional training in health and safety, and that affected our ability to assign people, because people have to understand the issues of health and safety, and even for the two programs that are active that I mentioned at Glendon and University of Ottawa, our interpreters are teaching there as well. So the Translation Bureau is the spine of the whole language industry in Canada. We have the best interpreters, and we're working with booths and systems so that students who are doing masters, it's a long time to study to become an interpreter. So we're working at full capacity. I have colleagues behind me who are working on assigning all the teams, and all of this is done very carefully. But other periods of the year are less busy than we are now, and they're always active in terms of training. That's already the case. So the people who we're talking about will be hired by others. If the departments don't have access to Bureau employees, they'll turn to other services to find interpretation services. So we want to identify the best and to increase our capacity. You talked about a shortage, that's the right word, but that's the case right now, and it's a great challenge for the language industry with everything that's going on. A final question, Mr. Chairman, if I may. Just to make you aware of the fact, I'm asking so many questions about quality, and that's because we say that Parliament is bilingual, everything's done in both languages, but in reality, 3/4 of the work happens in English. So clearly, the burden of it, the quality is so important for us. It's because, and I understand that we're in a situation where there's a shortage, but if you say that in the departments we're not able to have briefings in both languages that are high quality because the senior officials are less and less bilingual, and they're not able to come and give us a briefing of new legislation, for example. So there's a reality of anglicization within the government administration, and at the same time there's a shortage of interpreters. So you'll understand that for me, who needs interpretation as a francophone, I'm not certain that the path you are headed down is a good one, because in 3 years, when you'll find yourselves with all of your interpreters retired, your most senior interpreters and experienced one, who's going to be left, Mr. Limburner? You're going to have a group of interpreters who didn't pass their exam, who have little or no support in order to improve and pass that accreditation exam, and they're going to start working here. And you'll say to me, Madame de Bellefeuille, that's you have that or nothing. So that really discourages me, because I know we're headed towards that. You just said it. For governments, for the government and for departments, it's that or nothing. So that's the train that's heading towards us, and it really discourages me, because there's not a long-term sustainable solution to this. So, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to let my other colleagues ask questions, because I would have many more to ask, but you will understand my interest in understanding what solutions, what avenues await us, and what can we expect that's better than what we're having right now. What you're proposing to us is a lesser evil, but it's very concerning to me. Thank you, Madame de Bellefeuille. We'll move now.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a couple of questions. My first one is corollary to what the chair raised on the 4 versus 6 hours. It's my understanding, so I'm wanting to understand it better, that interpreters already are working 6-hour shifts, but the 4 hours is spent interpreting, the other 2 in translation. So I'm wondering, is that correct? Because your answer made it sound like you haven't gone to the 6 hours. I think you have. It's about allocation.
So, Mr. President, the 6 hours is really the numbers of hours that you're doing interpretation. That's now been reduced to 4 hours since the hybrid parliament came on board. But as interpreter, in terms of their classification, they can do other duty as well, including translation. So, but the 6 hours specifically for interpretation hour.
Right. So what I'm trying to get to is, if they're already doing 6-hour shifts, what is the barrier between them going from 4 hours interpreting and 2 hours of translation to 6 hours of interpretation at this point in time?
Yeah, so maybe I didn't make myself clear, Mr. President. The 6 hours is for interpretation only. So that's the number of hours that we're tracking very closely. That now is limited to 4 hours a day. And our goal in our discussion we had in the opening statement is try to go back to the previous, to the pandemic. You could do interpretation for 6 hours in a row. The work week, there's other function that these interpreter can do as well, but that's not calculated. The 6 hours is solely for interpretation within a day of work.
I think we're miscommunicating here a bit. I understand that, but what is the barrier, or why are they not currently using that whole 6-hour shift for interpretation?
Okay, so I'll turn to Mr. Ball in a few seconds, but from what I recall and what I've read and everything that I was briefed on, with the number of incidents I spoke about at the beginning, like 128 plus that happened in 2022, there was measures, and at that time it was very different. I mean, now we have people online. I can see the members that are online. We're mastering the technology. You probably also, everybody has now the good headsets. It's I think the behavior across Canada has increased tremendously, but that back in those days in 2022, in the middle of the pandemic, there was a lot of uncertainties, and the number were clearly going high. So in order to protect and to make sure that we were not exposing our interpreter, the number of hours was reduced in order for us to understand what was going on. There was a component of that. It was technology. Component of that was the quality of people that were online. So all those measures have been put in place. And like I said, now we see that the number of incidents are going back down. So setting the stage to go back to the condition that we were using before the pandemic. You will understand that if the numbers were going up and that we were still not able to provide a safe environment, that would have been reduced. Matthew, do you want to add on the 4 to 6 hours?
Sure, if I may, Mr. Chair. The work programming, the parliamentary program is complex. We don't go into great details here. Interpreters actually are on 12-hour shifts for which they are on standby serving the parliament. Of those 12 hours, prior to the pandemic, 6 of them were at the microphone. And when I say 6 of them, there were days when there was a bit more, there were days when there was a bit less. When there was less work in interpreting, they would do translation. Mr. Limburner referred to the major shift when the pandemic hit everyone. And like other workplaces around the world, there was a whole sea change in interpreting. So we had 2 parliamentary committees which resumed in the weeks following the outbreak of the pandemic, HESA and FINA. They were all run out over the telephone with audio conferences only. Our staff were reduced. There was an explosion in health and safety incidents, and so the management team took the decision to reduce the hours to 4 at the microphone because the conditions were such and the number of health and safety incidents were alarming, to say the least. Since then, things have gotten much better. Members who are appearing and witnesses who are appearing virtually are using ISO-compliant microphones. The working conditions have gotten much better. Parliamentarians and our colleagues with the House administration have done an excellent job improving the workplace conditions. There are still some incidents, as we saw last week, but we do feel that we're making great progress, and I'm confident that in the future we will be able to resume to pre-pandemic working conditions, which means that interpreters will be on 12-hour shifts, and we're hoping to be able to get back to a full 6-hour microphone duties. We are also being cautious because, as you know, capacity is dependent on the health and safety of interpreters. And if we have interpreters who are injured or on workplace accommodations, it does negatively affect our capacity. So we're confident that the situation is improving. That we have mentioned to the House administration that we're confident we will be able to provide services as prior to the pandemic in terms of the work schedule. So for me, I think this is it augurs quite well.
Thank you. I think we're all very familiar with the history and how we got here. What we're interested in is now we are here, post-pandemic, full hybrid, incidents are down. So I think what all parliamentarians are wondering is, of course, about capacity, and therefore, when you say you're being cautious, I understand why, but we're looking to some sort of sense of timelines. Because we're not in 2022 now. And all these things that you just listed very accurately are in place. So that's a pressing imperative from parliamentarians. The second question is on Monday, which was unfortunate. I don't even think it was the person speaking. It may have been the person next to him because there's more than one microphone on. And I know Madame de Belfoy and I'm sure others all spoke to their caucuses yesterday morning, again, about this issue and being as careful as possible. My recommendation is put the headset in your desk because then you're pretty sure. These help, these stickers, for sure, but if it's in the desk, there never seems to be a problem. But what I was being asked, and there was confusion as to why it took us over 45 minutes to resume on Monday, because we were being told there were no injuries, and what we were hearing through our headsets was from the interpreters saying there's been an incident in the interpretation room. We didn't know whether that meant the incident we all knew about, the feedback, or whether someone was hurt, but we were being told that. And then when we kind of knew that no one was hurt, it seemed to take a long time for us to resume. So I'm wondering if you can give me some understanding of why it took that long.
Yeah, very good question, Mr. President. Of course, we were instantly, we all have TVs in our offices, so we were all switching to the question period to see what was going on. Of course, it was a lively debate happening at the time. We could hear, for us, the first question, we got an instruction from Labour Canada as recently as April. So as we're striving to get back to pre-pandemic condition, that's a very fresh one that is targeting specifically the Larsen effect. So the first order was to identify exactly what happened. We were able to understand it was about a 7 seconds Larsen effect that happened on that day. So for us, the first thing is to say what type of incident. There could be other sound incident. There could be issues with the bandwidth for people online. Sometimes the volume is not good enough. So are we within the zone of a Larsen effect, which was confirmed to us fairly quickly. So Mr. Ball and his team then executed the protocol because we have, and we've met, and I'll let Madame Trépanier maybe mention our interaction with Labour Canada on that day as well, because we have a protocol that we have to put in place. And that protocol is to make sure that, first of all, was a Larsen effect. Then if the room is back to normal, there's some tests that we need to make sure that this is not still happening. You can imagine if we sent interpreters and that Larsen effect is still there, then we're just going to continuously send people. So all those confirmation were made, and a new crew was dispatched as quickly as possible. I understand that there's probably better ways to work. Maybe over the summer we can take some creative thinking session where we could have maybe people remotely being ready to step in like a lot quicker when something like that happened. There's tests that are going to have to be conducted. I mean, as I said, there was no Larsen effect since the instruction, and this time it happened in the question period. So this is definitely probably the area where there's the most people, and the people are close to one another. I just want to reassure you that we want to make sure that what happened, and we understood it was done quickly. Our team conducted tested. They identified the cause. We've identified the time it took, and for us, it was a decision to remove the team based on the length of the incident in order to be in line with the protocol that we've agreed with Labour Canada. I would like to ask Madame Trépanier maybe to discuss a little bit about the relationship that we have with Labour Canada related to those type of incidents, and maybe to explain to you why we have to follow that protocol very carefully.
Madame Trépanier, si je peux vous demander d'être
Ms. Trépanier, if I can ask you to be brief in your explanation, please, because there's another item that's related to the Translation Bureau. And I'd like to ensure that we have enough time to ask questions on the second point. And of course, we have a very close relationship with the investigator from the labor program. We have in place a whole list of different stages that we have to go through when there is a larceny incident. And this includes the technicians in place and our colleagues. We have to ensure when there is such an incident that everything is in place so that such an incident doesn't happen again. So obviously there are several stages that can take a certain amount of time to go through the various steps. So I can tell you that that's the first time we had a larceny effect with this protocol in place. So obviously we will improve over time. I hope we don't have several of these to test it, but that was the first time, and we learned lessons from these events, and we hope it won't happen again. But now we've learned something. And if there is another larceny effect incident, I think we'll be able to take further measures in the future.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
questioning Ms. Hoda. Then we have a second round of Mr. Julien and Madame de Bellefeuille.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I wanted to confirm to Ms. Finley's comments that I too did raise this with the Liberal caucus on Wednesday as well. And I'm pleased that there were no injuries. I'm glad that, there's been a effective, protocol put in place after the incident that happened in April. I wanted to know a little bit more because you had mentioned that incidences had increased during the pandemic due to the various factors that were in place. The last two incidences, the one before the Easter break and now this one that's been a larceny effect, has been created through in-person work. And so my curiosity goes back to a little bit like pre-pandemic, what were our incident levels, and now at this time, how do they compare?
So maybe maybe I'll turn to my colleagues of the House of Commons for the situation before the pandemic. I hope I was clear that we're tracking any sound-related incidents. So that's a family of incidents that for us are important behind the door. I'm sure that my colleague have other type of issues that they have when they conducted meetings that are related to the technical support. And obviously the attention or the number of incidents were not that high before. It's a little bit like concussion in football, for those of you who follow that, where a few years ago it might not have been as known as it is right now in the protocol for kids or others playing, because the injuries could happen. In the case of a larceny effect, it's very similar to concussion. So symptoms can appear between 24 and 48 hours afterwards. So that's why there's some carefulness around that. So the attention is obviously raised, so we're tracking them more closely. I think that's one part. Maybe I'll ask Benoit and others for the number of incidents prior to or everything else that you track, because I know you're tracking other type of incident in your business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ms. Oda, there were incidents before in the pre-pandemic. I mean, you see these stickers that you have on there. These stickers have been in place for at least 15 years, if not more, 10 years at least. So we don't have the exact numbers, but I can confirm that there were some incidents prior to the pandemic. So it is a normal problem that we had to deal with even prior to hybrid. I don't know if you want to add anything to this.
Sure, through you, Mr. Chair. Just to add, as Benoit said, we've had in the house, you'll know on the console where the buttons are. There's been a little plate that's been there since I believe it's 2008, 2009. So there's been incidents in the house going back before that even. That's why one of the reasons why those little engraved plates are there. Similar for these ones which were put in, and I believe it was 2016 or 2017 that we added these as well when there were incidents. Really the Larson Effects acoustic, the Larson Effects or the feedback is really caused when there is an earpiece from an adjacent console that's close to a microphone. And especially now that there's been a changeover to I'm not a technical expert, but I've been spending a lot of time with all of my colleagues looking at these questions quite seriously over the course of the last few months. And it really is a case when it's an earpiece that's very loud from an adjacent console that's close to a live microphone. If it's even the earpiece that's that's connected to the live microphone, the system automatically reduces the volume. And so there are little things that are already built into the system that reduce the risk, but we've still had problems. But some of the things like changing the earpieces have made an incredible difference in terms of, and scientifically demonstrated by our technical folks, that the act of changing the earpieces has made a remarkable difference in terms of the sensitivity of the microphone and earpieces. So.
If I may, a quick follow-up, Mr. Chair.
Please.
So thank you for that. That was a good analogy. And now that we are more aware of health and safety issues and want to make this a safer workplace, I think it's good that we're tracking it. My assumption would then be that we're somewhere probably at the lower end than maybe in the past when we weren't even entertaining the fact that we should be tracking these and have a protocol in place. So I'm glad that that's been put in place. I did mention to caucus that, these incidences that have been occurring are in large part due to human behavior and how we're using our earpieces. And it's interesting that you note that it's the adjacent earpiece that causes the impact. I wanted to know, in the presentation, you talked about more improvements to technology. The fact that that 7-second Larson effect did occur on Monday and that it didn't cause an actual injury, were you able to identify whether the technology in place may have reduced the risk, or was it just because the person was not wearing their headpiece, or what have we implemented as a House of Commons that perhaps mitigated that risk, or was it just good luck?
Okay, I'll talk through you, Mr. Chair. I'll talk briefly, but I'll pass it on to Yassine, who's our technical expert. But definitely, as part of the protocol in place, it's a variety of reasons, right? So we have, because our systems are ISO compliant, and Yassine can add to that. There's already thresholds that are built into our standards, so there's already protection mechanisms. But as Annie mentioned from the Translation Bureau, the protocol also is that as soon as the incident begins, the protocol is to remove the headset. So we would have to verify with the interpreters affected, but their natural behavior would have been to remove their headset right away and not wait the 7 seconds on that. But on the technical side, maybe Yassine, you can add.
Monsieur Willy.
Merci pour la question.
Thank you for the question. Indeed, our systems have integrated audio protection.
Protections. One is a warning sign if the levels are sustained over a certain threshold, in which case a beep would be sound to the interpreter saying we cannot operate at this level for a very long time. And the second one is against sudden peaks of sound, like an acoustic incident, like a Larson effect. Now, there's a threshold that's mandated by the ISO standards, which our systems comply to. And why we have an acoustic incident still and why it's happening is because that threshold has not been reached as identified by the ISO standards. So that's the current situation for why that happened.
Okay, thank you.
On va passer à la deuxième ronde des questions.
Go to the second turn. I have Mr. Julian, Madame de Bellefeuille. Could we please have all the questions by 12:35? That will give us enough time to go on to our next presentation.
Monsieur Julien.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's about the pilot project. It's not clear to me, to now, to what extent these interpreters, these new recruits, it's admitted that they are not of equal quality to the professionals we have now. Madame de Bellefeuille is perfectly right about that. What follow-up will be done with these interpreters? What kind of supervision will they get? How many hours a week? We're talking about a pilot project, but what's the follow-up? What's the supervision? We'd need more details to better understand all the challenges here. We do appreciate the work of all the interpreters and of the Translation Bureau, but to my mind, it's not clear how they provide high-quality interpretation, which is the foundation of our bilingual parliament. It's unclear what will be done to ensure that when other interpreters, like Cindy, who retires, that we'll have quality that's as high from the new interpreters who will replace people like her. Our objective is to maintain the same quality standards that we have at the Translation Bureau. We're very proud of that. But as I said in my presentation, we also have to ensure that we identify future interpreters who have potential and supervise them, as Mr. Ball explained. We have managers who are former interpreters who will take part in that supervision and accompany these recruits, and we'll see the effects this has. If we can have them pass the accreditation exam eventually, we'll deploy all necessary efforts, but we want to identify them earlier so as not to lose them and have the ability in Canada, because there are interpreters elsewhere too in other countries who have potential. Want to help them and accompany them. Thank you, but I don't want a political answer. I want details. I want to know what is the monitoring, what follow-up will be done every week with these new recruits. That's what I'd like to know. If you don't have this information with you, perhaps you could provide it to the board in the coming days. I think that will reassure us, but up until now, I don't have the details. I don't have confidence in this, that there will be follow-up. There's no clear indication. The monitoring doesn't seem to be done. So having the details would reassure us. Okay, with pleasure. Do you have this information with you? We could provide this information later. It's up to you, Mr. Ball.
We have a lot of experience monitoring and training new interpreters. There's many methods to ensure that they receive the feedback and experience they need. Anyone who starts in a position in a new job is learning. C'est en forgeant que l'on devient forgeron. Ensuring that we have the capacity and that we have the quality. The organizations that may have shared information with you that we consulted with, they're not responsible for the service. We are responsible for the service. We have more than 30 years of experience providing training, teaching, and monitoring the work of our staff and of our freelancers. We can use recordings of interpreters' performance to provide them feedback after the fact. For events that we deem important or significant, we always have someone with these interpreters who are ready to take over the microphone should their performance not meet the quality standards. So there's a lot of ways we can do this. We can send both freelance and staff interpreters to monitor and to supervise and to provide feedback for these new recruits. This is nothing new. I myself was hired in 1999 as a recruit. I myself would have met the exact same quality standards that were shared with you. So I'm quite confident that we're able to do this successfully. We've heard loud and clear from members of parliament and senators the need for more interpreters and for good quality service, and that's what we're acting on. So I'm quite hopeful that we can do this, and I'd like to reassure members of the board that this is part of our regular operations, and in many respects this is nothing new. It's new in the sense that we're hiring the pilot project would be to hire people as freelancers rather than as staff. That's the big difference. But otherwise, it's pretty much the same.
Mais avez-vous un guide, un manuel?
Well, do you have a manual, a guide, a recipe for supervision that you could share with us?
Ask you to come back or to provide us with information, if you could, some written information on that front, which qu'on peut partager avec les membres.
Maybe we could share that with members of this board. And we'll allow you to prepare the documents necessary or put it in a format that's quite accessible for us. Ms. de Bellefeuille. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I agree fully with Mr. Julian's insistence on this. We fail to understand how you're going to provide sufficient support to these new recruits who fail the accreditation exam. How are you going to help them, give them everything necessary to pass the next exam? I understand that practice makes perfect, but you still have to take the time to do the job long enough to learn it properly. Those are the doubts we have. Now, if you can reassure us with your plan that will be okay, we'll be reassured. Now, to get back to what Ms. Finley said, what I understand, Mr. Limburner, is that you have permanent unionized people and freelancers on contract, a contract that the supply department has signed. In that contract, you have contracts for 4 hours of interpretation, whereas the unionized people, it says 6 hours in their contract, in their collective agreement. With the pandemic, my understanding was that with the integration of the hybrid parliament, it was decreed that the cognitive load for an interpreter means that 4 hours is the maximum. That was documented. That's why freelancers have the 4-hour contract, and the collective agreement, even if it's 6 hours, you have to match the freelancer's contract and give them 4 hours. So that's what I understood when I tried to study this issue. And as long as you don't have assurance that the cognitive load due to the hybrid parliament and the technical equipment you have is not well adapted, and you're waiting for the results of those 3 studies, documenting that, you're going to have a problem imposing your 6 hours of booth time. So you have to match these contracts that you're going to be renewing under the same conditions for the next year for the freelancers. So my question is, when we had that incident and when the administration in your office had to look at this Labor Bureau order to take all kinds of action to avoid the situation and avoid the Parliament not being able to sit, because that's what we realized, is if this action was not satisfactory for the Labor Bureau, well, then Parliament would not sit. That's serious. That's what would have happened. We would have lost 1 day or 2 days. We don't know. So my recommendation in all this is this was done quickly. I know the administration worked very hard with your team to put in place those measures. There are some that I would criticize and that are maybe even more dangerous than they used to be. And I'll put the question to you, Mr. Ball and Ms. Trépanier. They're at the same desk. They're using one microphone, but they're not using their headpiece because they understand both languages. But imagine that I'm here with my earpiece and I have a colleague with his earpiece. We have one single microphone. These earpieces are being waved around. Your earpieces are not being used. That's very safe. But in real life, in committee rooms, the decision of the Bureau to have one earpiece and one microphone per table, when you have 2 MPs of the same party together, the earpieces move around and it's very dangerous. So I think that the safety officers may well decree measures, but they have to be able to rely on experience of those who are subjected to those, and that measure is more dangerous than if we had maintained the same desks with 2 microphones, because now we're shifting around the earpieces. We're increasing the risk rather than reducing it. I don't know whether that'll be part of your discussions, but I wanted to point out that quite often when we want to prevent something, we really have to consult the people who use these things and who are in the action. I see you, Mr. Ball, Ms. Trépanier. You're talking, you don't have earpieces, and that's the proof I need right before my eyes. So I'm wondering if you need feedback from parliamentarians, because we parliamentarians, we don't want the interpreters to be injured. But we want whatever's put in place to make sense and achieve the objective of protection. So in that sense, we have to rely on the administration, on members of parliament, if you want to consult the whip's offices, because there are many measures. If we had had decisions to make, maybe that's not the decision we would have taken. So in an effort to have continuous improvement, yes, we had an order, but this order means that they have to understand in what context we work here and use the experience of those who use the equipment. I fully agree, Mr. Chairman. We have to stop at some point, even though I'm very interested in this subject. But if you allow Mr. Limburner to provide us with his plan for mentoring, we could maybe have another discussion. And I would like to close with a few comments on the dashboard. And that's my last comment. I don't know how you want to do this. Thank you for that, Mr. de Bellefeuille. You're very generous. And perhaps we could allow Mr. Lieberger, Mr. Ball, and Ms. Trépanier to leave. I don't know if they want to stay, but Mr. Dicker, Mr. McDonald, rather than make a presentation on the dashboard, because we're used to seeing this, perhaps we could go directly to questions. So, Madame de Bellefeuille, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I'd like to thank the team on gathering this data that allows us to see our progress with some of the indicators that we chose. Now, I'm not the kind of person to have work done when it's no longer necessary, but I think some of the indicators we're measuring should perhaps be withdrawn from the dashboard. The energy in gathering this information could be focused on other ones. I'll give an example. I think we've understood at this point that 80% of the time worked in committees is now in person. So we've reached the percentage that we wanted to reach, and we've reached a plateau. I think it's reasonable. So I congratulate all those involved and for having encouraged the administration to be inventive and creative. Everything you've put in place, Mr. McDonald, with the IT team is really super. But we shouldn't assume that because we've reached this goal that we should be satisfied and stop all the measures that we put in place to reach it. So I take it for granted, Mr. Chairman, that everything that's put into place to achieve these measures, this rate of participation in person, which is the best way of protecting our interpreters, should be maintained, and that we look at other indicators now. So I would like to follow the pilot project very closely, dispersed mode, for example, of interpretation. So I will let the administration present us the indicators. What would be interesting to follow, with the objective we have in mind of maintaining the quality and our participation, what can we improve? What is the administration going to follow closely and communicate to us so that we will be able to closely follow the pilot project, which I'm interested in. But perhaps Mr. McDonald would like to speak to us about other things they're studying, and so we could be able to compare and see if we're achieving our objectives. So I don't know if the group is in agreement with that we stop counting the minutes, but then we perhaps spend more time concentrating or focusing on the technical problems of interpretation. At the Bloc Québécois currently, we're monitoring all of our committee sessions, and we sent a summary to the administration of the technical problems that we have found that are not always linked to the system. Interpretation problems, quality of the interpretation problems, and perhaps what we submitted to you as a document could inspire you to have different indicators. So the dashboard is a management tool. It allows us at the Board of Internal Economy, without going into micromanagement, it gives us a very good idea of the administration's efforts to have ongoing progress. And that would be my proposal. Thank you very much, Madame de Bellefeuille. I think you're right, given that we've now achieved standards and that we're not going to go back on those. We can always improve the dashboard to focus on other objectives that are of interest and that we want to improve. Mr. McDonald? Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And for Ms. de Bellefeuille, absolutely. It's already something that we have in our action plan. And thank you again to you and your team for the information that you provided us with. To our teams, we've already done some follow-up. I followed up with my colleagues at the Translation Bureau for some components, just to send that key message. And we'll be looking at the things that we can measure and come back with a proposal in the fall. Any questions and comments on that point, on the dashboard? If not, we'll move on to item number 6. I thank once again the Translation Bureau and people from the administration for your work. And we'll look forward to seeing your information in the days to come.
Number 6, Monsieur Dicker, c'est à vous encore.
Mr. Dicker, it's you once again regarding our I'm sorry, I don't have the French version before me. The electric vehicle charging stations. Go ahead. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. I'm here today just to, because as promised on April 11th, I promised the board that I would come back with the implementation of the pay-per-use activation of the electric vehicle charging stations. We had a pilot project that began May 29th. We had 10 members participating from each of the parties, and we started that use. So May 29th, we're still in the early stages, but it's going well for the moment. And I'm confident that the pilot project will be a success. So I'm here just to propose the charging rates, which are in line with market rates. So I'm seeking the board's approval of that, and also for what we intended to do at the end of July for members and employees. Questions and comments? The only comment I wanted to make was that it's very important for members or people working on the Hill who are holders of charging passes for these stations that they be informed of these rates. You noted in the report that for the first 4 hours there will be one rate, and for people who leave their cars connected for over 4 hours will face a higher charge. So that's very important for members and staff to be aware of that. After 4 hours you have to disconnect your car, otherwise you're going to have a hefty bill to pay. Mr. Dicker, yes, that's right. The first 5 hours would be $1.50 an hour for the charging rate, and after 5 hours, standby.
Dollars per hour following the first 5 hours. And we are committed to communicating, as we always do, to members and every permit holder of the change.
And je vous félicite aussi parce que
I congratulate you as well, because the rates you're proposing are exactly the same as we see elsewhere in the private sector off the Hill. So congratulations on that. Any further questions or comments? If not, we'll adopt those changes for the pilot project for as a more permanent arrangement. Number 8, Mr. Jan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for the opportunity to present the House of Commons Report to Canadians 2024. As you may already know, this report allows Canadians to better understand their parliamentary system and the important work members undertake in the Chamber, in committees, in constituencies, and abroad on behalf of Canadians. It also includes details on the efforts made by the House of Commons administration to support parliamentary activities with impartiality and service excellence. Le rapport à la population canadienne.
The report to Canadians is presented in a printable, accessible HTML format and includes a written message from the Speaker and the Clerk, highlights from the Hill, a snapshot of members and their activities, an overview of the House administration structure and its results, and financial information concerning MPs and the House administration for the 2023-24 fiscal year. At the heart of the highlights in this report, you'll see the development and integration of the new administration strategic plan. This plan is based on key values that characterize our commitment to members, their staff, and our staff. These values are integrated and impartiality, excellence of service, collaboration, and inclusion.
Barriers such as those restricting access to our physical spaces or others limiting access to the work of the House. A good example would be how we've adapted some seats in the chamber galleries with a live transcription system so that people who are deaf or hard of hearing can better follow what's being said in the chamber in the official language of their choice. Further to the theme of accessibility, we continue to work closely with Public Services and Procurement Canada and others, including members of Parliament from all recognized parties, to ensure that the new spaces in the renovated centre block will meet the needs of all parliamentarians, employees, and visitors. Si vous approuvez ce rapport, il sera
If you approve this report, it will be tabled in the House as soon as possible in both official languages. It will also be available on the House of Commons public website in an accessible, printable, and HTML format.
Partners and legislative counterparts. Members of Parliament are welcome to use our social media posts or a short video that will be made available to them soon to share and discuss the report to Canadians with their constituents and followers. I'm, of course, available to answer any questions. Thank you very much. Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Jantz. We have 2 people on our list. Mr. Scheer.
Thanks very much. One of the bullet points in the slide was building an inclusive workspace, and I know that Parliament has recognized many Heritage Days and Heritage Months. Are those the types of things that does the House Administration mark those types of official days, either by initiating events or other types of things, or encouraging staff to lead those types of events or gatherings or days of celebrating culture or language?
We do through different channels. So on social media, there is either through the Speaker's accounts or the House Administration accounts, there's a lot of messages that go out on X or on Instagram with respect to a whole host of days, weeks, months, as you allude to. Internally, we see it as a very positive thing. A lot of movement on the inclusion diversity front. We have a very active diversity council within the employees of the House of Commons. We have seen created over the last few months a Black Employees Network. We also have one now for disabled employees. We have a very active women's leadership network. And there's others presumably that might, other employees who might wish to develop groups. It's very much a grassroots initiative. So in light of this and in light of the large number of different heritage days, months, et cetera, that exist, we are actually in the process of taking kind of a step back and looking at how can we do this ideally and equitably so that we hope by next year, so January 1st, we'd have a bit of a plan in terms of how we would internally communicate these things, and also when we would organize events or have these individual employee-led groups organize events to celebrate these days. Because again, there's a good number of them, and we want to be fair and equitable to all.
So the House administration kind of officially puts out messages from its main social media accounts or from corporate email accounts to the employees?
That's correct.
And in terms of initiating any types of events, or would there be administration-led lunches or receptions? I know when I was speaker, there were often things for staff to celebrate some of those types of months or weeks or days.
Right. Well, perhaps as a very good example, we had the Black Employees Network that put together, in conjunction with Black History Month, an event, and that was open, of course, to all employees, and it was, and the speaker participated. It was a very well-received, well-attended event, so that would be an example. Yeah.
We've just had some informal, anecdotal communications from staff saying that in May, Jewish Heritage Month wasn't marked. So I just wanted to fact check that because, as I said, it's anecdotal. We haven't had a chance to do with it. But was Jewish Heritage Month marked or celebrated or recognized by House administration?
It was on the external communications. It wasn't internally. Not internally. We haven't in the past. And part of the rationale, as I just mentioned, to take two steps back and look at a strategy in terms of how we can do this equitably in that, because if not, you would be literally looking at almost an email per day in every employee's inbox. So we said what we'll do for the remainder of this year is we'll just continue to communicate what we've done in the past, and in that interim period, we'll look together at putting together a strategy for how we can go forward starting January 1st.
So some are marked internally with a corporate.
Well, for instance, there was for the Pride, which is the month of June. That's something we've done in the past, so it was done again this year. But again, going forward for the quite long list of things that could be celebrated and commemorated, we're looking at having some kind of strategy in place for next year.
Pride was, but Jewish Heritage Month wasn't because in the past it also wasn't?
That's correct.
And was there a rationale in the past for not marking Jewish Heritage Month internally?
It's a good question. I wasn't directly involved in the past. Sometimes things stemmed from the Diversity Council and not necessarily from corporate House of Commons. So I think this is something we're trying to look at. Again, to be equitable to all the different groups and heritage groups, et cetera, but also to not necessarily inundate people's inboxes. And also if there's going to be events associated with certain days, months, weeks, how can we be equitable with that? It takes resources to put together these events. People are attending events. They're not necessarily then at their desk. So it's all these factors that we want to take into consideration to put together a plan for next year.
Mr. Julian.
Oh, just briefly, I think it's an excellent report, and I approve its distribution.
Any other comments? D'autres commentaires?
Other comments? Do we have your approval for this report to be distributed as soon as possible? Thank you. So, colleagues, that brings us to the final point on today's agenda, which is number 8.
Excuse-moi, c'est le rapport annuel.
It's the annual report on committee activities for 2023-2024, and Ms. Cadieux and Mr. McDonald are here to speak to this point. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As the board members already know, in the standing orders of the House, the Board of Internal Economy has to table an annual report on committee expenditures. So for several years, since 2012, a report has been prepared by the Liaison Committee, which is then sent to BOIE for its consideration, and then it is tabled in the House by the Speaker.
To highlight a couple of the numbers from this year's report, and I had one last thing to mention as well.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's been another very busy year at the Committee's Directorate. We've heard under just over 4,700 witnesses, and the committees have held over 1,200 meetings. We've received over 4,000 briefs. There's been over 180 reports presented to the House. The activity levels remain very high, and this is compared to kind of long-term historical averages, and this reflects very much the very high numbers that we saw last year. Everything is just a tiny smidge under what the record levels of last year was, donc c'est encore très, très occupé au niveau des activités.
So it's still a very high level of activity at all the committees. And if I may, Mr. Chairman, a final point to mention.
The liaison committee has already approved a new format for the report for next year, which will streamline the preparation of the report and will make it a little bit more timely to prepare as well, sort of thing. And so the next time the board is seized with this matter, it will see a slightly different format to the report. But I think it's that we believe in the liaison committee members agreed that it was an improvement to the overall format. So we just wanted to share that with board members as well.
It's always good to have improvements. Thank you very much. Y a-t-il des questions, des commentaires?
Are there any questions or comments?
Publish this report, everyone. Thank you very much. And with that, we've come in under time on a very busy day. And if I do not have an occasion to do so, I'd like to just express to you how wonderful it has been to serve as your chair. And thank you for this. I wish you all a very good summer. And let us hope that no incidents will happen between now and then that will require us to meet before the fall. Enjoy the time in your constituencies. Meeting adjourned.
Thank you.